Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is Pro Revenge Story. Not sure if this fits this sub, but felt like posting my story. I have no issue with removing it if it doesn't quite meet the standard. So I have a really bad leg. I've had 13 surgeries, long story, and had just started at a new school in September 2023. After the first 3 weeks, I had to go in for another procedure on my leg. Not that big a deal to me. I've been here before. Upon my return, I had documentation of my restrictions, as well as special amenities that were required. The big three were that I needed extra time to get from class to class, must have someone to escort me, and needed unrestricted access to the elevator. All of these got me recurring problems, such as constant harassment by teachers and security about my being in the halls during class time. "Why are you wandering the halls again?" Mr. Peterson, the math teacher, would ask with obvious suspicion. "I have medical permission," I'd explain for what felt like the 100th time. Security guards were even worse. "And why is Ryan out too?" they'd demand, referring to my cousin who was filling the role as my escort, as I have anxiety problems and we had the same classes. "He's my designated escort," I'd have to explain repeatedly. "It's in my documentation." These first two were annoying, but easy enough to deal with. The real issue was the elevator, as I was told multiple times that for security issues I couldn't have a personal key due to it sharing the same functionality with the interior door keys. "We just can't give students access to a master key," Miss Wilson, the vice principal, explained during our initial meeting. "But don't worry, there will always be a staff member available to help you with elevator access." I would never have had any issues with this, as I was told there would always be someone on the same floor as my classes to open the elevator for me. This, of course, was untrue about 75% of the time. The lack of elevator access meant that I was always stuck in the halls when other students were going class to class, and was consistently late due to having to wait for someone to come by and open the door for the elevator. "I'm sorry I'm late again, Mrs. Thomas," became my daily refrain. "This is becoming a pattern," she would respond, making no effort to hide her irritation. This also meant that I would sometimes be stuck waiting through the entire lunch period, and due to my absences couldn't afford to simply go to lunch after the fact. After about 3 weeks of this, I was tired of not getting to eat lunch, so I did one of the stupidest things I could have attempted and tried to use the stairs. For context, I was not on crutches, I was on a full-blown walker. About halfway down to the landing, I fell. Hard. As lunch was letting out, one of my friends, Josh, found me. "Oh my God!" he shouted. "Someone help! He fell!" Josh got someone to help pick me up and carried me to the office. Another of my friends went to find my other cousin Mia. Ryan, who normally escorted me, wasn't there due to being sick, so I was without escort because I couldn't bear the thought of, gasp, a stranger escorting me, who when getting to the office managed to get me to calm down enough to give them my mother's number. "Just breathe," Mia said, holding my hand. "Your mom will be here soon." Now, my mother is quite hot-tempered but can keep a level head normally. When she heard I fell, she was there in record time. When she got there, she immediately asked what happened. "What happened to you?" she demanded, her eyes widening at the sight of me slumped in the office chair. "I didn't want to miss lunch again," I explained shakily, "so I tried to use the stairs." Big mistake, as that set off a Tsar Bomba-sized explosive. She immediately turned around and demanded for the principal and VP to get in there ASAP. "I want Mr. Thompson and Miss Wilson in here right now," she shouted at the secretary. "This is completely unacceptable." As soon as the principal and VP walked in, she started berating them in a fashion not suitable for most adults to hear, let alone kids. "How dare you put my child in danger?" she yelled. "After all the documentation we provided, after all the promises you made." When the VP made an offhand remark about my condition, my mother lost it completely. "Maybe if he wasn't so difficult about having strangers help him," Miss Wilson started. My mother lunged across the desk. "Don't you dare blame my child for your incompetence." She was swarmed by local sheriffs that provided security for the school's entrances and office as she physically went after the VP. We were escorted out, and after looking at the file and realizing my cousin Ryan and I had the same address, they figured out that I didn't actually live there. "You don't even live in this district?" Mr. Thompson said with a smirk. "Well, that explains a lot." Now, my grandmother's address was listed as she looked after me after I left school up until around 8 p.m. She also was raising my cousin Ryan after an issue between her and my aunt. They used this as grounds to expel me and told her I can be some other school's problem now. I was then enrolled at the school near my house and had to have yet another surgery in January 2024 to repair the damage that was done as a result of my fall and redo the work of the previous procedure. I had gotten multiple statements from teachers as well as my doctors, and my parents were moving forward with a lawsuit naming the VP, principal, and the county school board. "This isn't just about you anymore," my dad explained. "This is about making sure they never do this to another kid." We were contacted by a lawyer, Mr. Gonzalez, who had won multiple cases against our school board, some of which went to the state Supreme Court, and he told us he would take our case pro bono. "I've been fighting this board for years," Mr. Gonzalez told us during our first meeting. "Your case might be exactly what we need to force real change." He was getting tired of going against the board and thought a case like this would be what it took to try and fix their problems. "The evidence is clear," he explained. "They failed to provide legally required accommodations resulting in physical harm. Plus, we have documentation of everything." Fast forward 9 months to October 2024, and I was walking out of court with a settlement to cover all my procedures, as well as a written confirmation that the school would be going through a complete administrative overhaul and that the principal and VP would be let go and have their administrative credentials revoked in our state. "This is a landmark case for disability rights in our district," Mr. Gonzalez told reporters outside the courthouse. "The message is clear. Ignoring medical accommodations won't be tolerated." My new school was let know day one my medical requirements and my need for a personal elevator key by the superintendent and the head of the State Board of Education. "We take accessibility seriously here," my new principal assured me. "Your key will be ready tomorrow, and all staff have been briefed on your accommodations." For the first time, I felt like a school was actually prepared to help me succeed rather than treating me like an inconvenience. The next one is an entitled people story. I bought my house about 3 years ago in a neighborhood with an HOA. I know what you're thinking, and yeah, I should have known better. But the house was perfect, the price was right, and the HOA fees seemed reasonable. For the first couple of years, everything was fine. The HOA was mostly invisible, which is exactly how I like it. Then we got a new HOA president. Let's call him the president, because that's what he insisted everyone call him. Not his actual name, just the president. That should have been my first warning sign. The president was one of those guys who clearly peaked in high school and spent the rest of his life trying to recapture that feeling of authority. He was retired with way too much time on his hands, and he treated the HOA like it was his personal fiefdom. Within a month of taking over, he'd sent out 3 times as many violation notices as the previous president had sent in an entire year. My first run-in with him came when I parked my work truck in my driveway overnight. I'm a contractor, and sometimes I need to load up equipment early in the morning. The next day, there was a nastily worded notice on my door about commercial vehicles not being allowed in driveways overnight. I checked the HOA rules, and sure enough, it was technically there, buried in subsection something or other. Fine. I started parking the truck at my company's lot, but then things got weird. One morning, I came out to find the president standing in my driveway with a measuring tape. He didn't knock, didn't ask permission, just helped himself to my property. When I asked what he was doing, he barely looked up and said he was conducting an inspection. An inspection of what exactly? My driveway was just a normal concrete driveway. It wasn't cracked, wasn't stained, wasn't anything worth inspecting. I let it go because I didn't want to start a war over nothing. That was my mistake. 2 weeks later, I got a letter. Not an email, a formal letter delivered to my mailbox in an official HOA envelope. The letter informed me that after careful review of the community property records and governing documents, it had been determined that my driveway was actually community property and would need to be made available for community use. I read it 3 times because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Community property, my driveway, the driveway that I paid for, that was on my property, that I'd been using exclusively for 3 years. I called an emergency meeting with the HOA board. The president showed up with a smug smile and a folder full of documents. He explained his logic, which made absolutely no sense. According to him, because the original developer had built all the driveways at the same time using HOA funds before the individual lots were sold, the driveways were technically common areas. Therefore, any homeowner could park in any driveway. The other board members looked uncomfortable, but nobody spoke up. The president had that effect on people. I pulled out my deed and showed everyone that my property line clearly included the driveway. It was right there in black and white, with a survey and everything. The president waved it away and said deeds could be wrong, and the HOA governing documents superseded individual property deeds anyway. That's not how property law works, but he said it with such confidence that some people actually nodded along. I left that meeting furious. I consulted with a real estate attorney friend who laughed when I told him the story. He confirmed what I already knew. My driveway was definitely my private property, and the HOA president was completely wrong. The attorney offered to send a letter, but I had a better idea forming. See, the thing about the president was that he lived in the nicest house in the neighborhood. Corner lot, circular driveway, the whole 9 yards. His precious luxury sedan was always parked prominently in that driveway, polished to a mirror shine. He washed it every Sunday like clockwork. If my driveway was community property, then his driveway was community property too. I decided to comply with his ruling, maliciously. The next morning, I parked my work truck right in the middle of his circular driveway, not blocking him in because that would be illegal, just taking up prime real estate in what was now, according to him, community property. He came storming over within 10 minutes, red-faced and sputtering. I was in my garage and walked out to meet him with the most innocent expression I could manage. He demanded to know what I thought I was doing. I calmly explained that I was simply utilizing community property exactly as outlined in his letter. Since all driveways were community property, I'd chosen to park in his driveway today. Tomorrow I might pick a different one. Wasn't it wonderful how we could all share? He said that wasn't what he meant. I asked him to clarify how my driveway was community property, but his wasn't. He stammered something about his being different, larger, part of his landscaping plan. I pointed out that none of those things were mentioned in his letter or in any HOA documents. A driveway was a driveway. He threatened to have my truck towed. I reminded him that you can't tow a vehicle from community property if it's legally parked, which mine was. I also mentioned that I'd be happy to discuss this with the police if he wanted to call them, because I had my deed right here and would love to have an officer explain property law to him. He stormed off and I went to work. My truck stayed in his driveway all day. When I got home that evening, there were 3 other cars parked in his driveway. Turns out, word had spread quickly about the president's community property theory, and several neighbors who'd been on the receiving end of his petty tyranny decided to test it out themselves. His circular driveway looked like a parking lot. The president called an emergency board meeting that night. I didn't attend, but I heard through the grapevine that it was chaos. He wanted to immediately revoke the community property designation for driveways. The other board members, who'd apparently grown spines overnight, asked him how he could revoke something that he'd claimed was in the original governing documents. Either driveways were community property, or they weren't. Which was it? He tried to argue that his driveway was different, special, exempt. Someone asked to see where in the governing documents it said that. He couldn't produce anything because, of course, none of this was actually in the governing documents to begin with. He just made it all up. The board voted unanimously to confirm that all driveways were private property belonging to the individual homeowners, exactly as specified in everyone's deeds. They also voted to send a formal apology letter to all homeowners for the confusion and to remind everyone that the HOA president didn't have the authority to unilaterally reinterpret property law. But I wasn't done yet. I filed a formal complaint with the board about the president's conduct, citing his repeated trespassing on my property, his frivolous threats, and his attempt to usurp private property rights. I attached my attorney friend's letter explaining exactly how wrong the president had been from a legal standpoint. Several other homeowners filed similar complaints. Turns out, once people weren't afraid of him anymore, they had a lot to say about his behavior during his tenure. The board asked for his resignation. He refused at first, but when someone pointed out that the alternative was a recall vote that he would definitely lose, plus potential personal liability for some of his actions, he suddenly decided to step down for personal reasons. The new president was a retired teacher who actually read the governing documents and understood that an HOA's job is to maintain common areas, not to harass homeowners. Life in the neighborhood improved dramatically. The former president still lives here, and he never makes eye contact with me anymore. His driveway remains empty except for his own car. And my driveway, which was always my property despite his bizarre power trip, remains exclusively mine. The best part? My attorney friend said he's going to use this story in his property law class as an example of what happens when people don't understand the difference between private property and common areas. The former president's hubris is now a teaching tool. Sometimes the best way to fight ridiculous rules is to follow them exactly as stated, even when the person making the rules never thought about how those rules might apply to them. The president wanted community property driveways, and I gave him exactly what he asked for. He just didn't realize his driveway was part of the community too. The next one is a petty revenge story, so there's some backstory to this post. About 2 years ago, my friend, let's call him Jared, came to me asking about bartending. At that point, I had been bartending for about 7 years and had opened a few big-name successful bars. He mentioned wanting to buy a local music venue and rebrand it. Fast forward to the business starting, I created the entire POS system, hired all of the bartenders, did all of the inventory ordering, etc. None of the owners have ever been in the service industry and did not know a single thing about crap. I would never get paid on time, got treated terribly by them, and they never lived up to their end of the deal. They owe me a lot of money and spread some pretty horrible lies about me. Now for the petty revenge. I recently discovered this old app on my phone that controls the entire setup, lighting, etc. to this place. I'm pretty positive I'm still the only one who can remotely control this unless you are at the bar. Of course, they never removed my access and more than likely have no idea how to unless they were to redo all of the setup on the back end. I decided to have some fun with this the other night. I changed all of the lights several times while the bar was open. Certainly not during a busy time, but just to test it out. I got the message on the app that said, "Successful, I knew I was golden." I turned them all off several times, waited a bit, and continued to do it. I know they had absolutely no idea what was going on. They turned off all of the power to the place twice and reset the breakers. I could tell this because all of the devices were offline. I let this go on for about 20-30 minutes and decided to not overdo it too much so they wouldn't get suspicious just yet. I did have an absolute blast watching all of the lights turn back on through the app just for me to mess with them over and over again. The best part, they are now set on automatic timers to turn off at 12 every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Don't worry, the dance room upstairs will still have light, but the entire bar area will go dark. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I was working remotely for a European-based manufacturer of, at least my division, high-end broadcast processing equipment. They also made other pro equipment, but this area was the highest end and by far the most technically demanding. Very niche-y, very configuration dependent, etc. Great technical staff and developers in Europe. We had great relationship being a bunch of tech nerds who could talk about IP ranges and capacitor values for hours. The US office just took orders from HQ over there. Had some good basic techs, but not set up to do any high-end troubleshooting, which is exactly why I existed. There was an acquisition coming up and auditors started to be involved. We had to send in inventory of all of our computers and test gear, etc. Fine, whatever. Well, remember that setup dependent part. I was right in the middle of a huge project with one of the largest US broadcasters, which had already resulted in one of the largest upgrade sales this division had ever made, and was testing some fresh from the sandbox SNMP features. This is pretty old tech that is still being used, so I enlisted an older Supermicro server I had been barely using for remotely accessing some kit in my workshop to do some basic SNMP functions to make sure these new features didn't bung anything up before I literally put them in air on 50+ stations. Things were working fine with tests. I'd get a new revision first thing in the morning, bang on it a bit, send it off to my tech contact by my EOD at the network, which was his morning. Not terribly difficult, but pretty niche-y, and also one reason I worked for this company. No one knew at all what any of this was in North America. So, auditors are involved, and the North American office that just takes orders sees this Supermicro server on the inventory list, and it's just the end of the world. Why is there a server out in the field? Why do you need so much test equipment? Who approved this, etc.? My first couple replies were just disregarded because no one knew what I was talking about. A decision was made that this server had to go back. A third insistence from me that this was actively used and who else would take this over fell on deaf ears. It was the most important thing in the entire world that they get this server back. It's a junky old Supermicro 1RU utility beast that cost maybe 1K at most. For whatever reason, I was feeling extra snarky the day I should have boxed the server up, so I wrote an extra friendly note to all the techs, the decision makers at the US office, and to my tech contact and his boss at the network, introducing everyone, thanking them for taking over this critical project, and thanking HQ for helping take on this time-sensitive test phase that would really help me get to other critical projects. About 25 minutes later, I sent tracking information for all the kit, still didn't box up the server I was supposed to send back. About an hour later, I get a really odd email from the decision makers in the US office. He doesn't want to admit that no one at HQ doesn't know what the hell I was talking about technically, and simultaneously realized this is a huge account that would totally affect their bonuses if another nice sale came through. They were trying to save face and cover for their techs by suggesting maybe I get them up to speed on the project before we do anything drastic. I just replied to his email with the tracking information again and mentioned I had suggested this 3x now. 25 minutes later, I get a freaked out phone call from the head tech at the US HQ. Him and his superior, the decision maker, have just got a very nice call from my contacts boss at the network. They were so happy with the service so far. I had a great relationship at this point, and excited that having someone else checking these updates would allow me to be on site more, big future plans, etc. He is wondering, who is going to do this work now? Now this comes up? I just repeated that 3x, this was brought up now, so clearly this decision was educated, they know best. So now there's full-blown panic at US HQ. Knowing this, I send a note to the developers in Europe to make sure the new updated code goes to the catch-all address for the US HQ tech team and not me, because they will be doing the testing going forward. This has the desired effect because now the head of development in Europe is on the horn with the decision maker in US wondering about who they recently hired without approval to be able to have these in-house resources now. By the time that UPS pickup was supposed to have happened, somehow having this old server back was no longer the highest priority. In fact, I never heard about the server again. The next one is an entitled People Story. This story is back from my college days. Now, I admit I was young and naive, always trying to see the best in people, which led to me sometimes being a doormat back then. I was hanging out with a group of friends one evening when one of them mentions he and his girlfriend need a place to stay because they want to start getting out on their own. They overheard that I currently lived solo in a one-bedroom apartment, and then approached me asking if they can move in and occupy the living room space until he and his girlfriend get a job so they can eventually get their own place. Yes, I look back and realize this was disaster waiting to happen. Me, stupidly thinking I could help them out, said they could live there for a while until they found employment, the expectation being that once employed, they'd be helping out with fair shares of rent and utilities. So they move in, and it doesn't take long for the entitlement to start. His girlfriend was such a pain in the ass, making demands on a place that wasn't even hers. She complained about my pets, saying she doesn't like cats and I should put them up for adoption since she would be living there. No, I'm not going to just throw my animals in a ducking shelter because your entitled princess ass says so. She didn't like that, and made gestures of disgust being around them while living there. Then, a few days after moving in, they hold, and I crap you not, a ducking housewarming party. Yes, you read that right. They invited our mutual friends over to celebrate getting their own place. 1 month in, and they still have no jobs, spending all day playing video games, not paying rent, and racking up my utility costs. I was ducking 22 and covering an apartment for 3 people. I finally snapped when they had their millionth couples argument, and she started getting idiot with me. The girlfriend was the type who liked to provoke and argue all the time, expecting everyone to cater to her. I had enough. So a few days later, I approached them in the living room and asked if they plan on contributing to the rent anytime soon. They both just stare at me, saying nothing. The boyfriend then looks down and says, "No." I then tell them things were not working out and they had to leave. The girlfriend's claws came out and man, she was set on giving me hell. I gave them 3 days to go, which clearly there was no intent to do so. She even went as far as to call the police on me because what I was illegally throwing her out. And sadly, by ridiculous law, she was right. The police officer stated that if someone moves into your place, regardless of being written on the lease or not, they weren't, they had the right to stay until I legally evicted them, could be up to 6 months. Pretty much insinuating that I had to serve them legal forms and all, a costly process and huge burden. A total parasite of a human being was now wanting to leech off of me for who knows how long. So I took initiative and shut off the electricity panel when they were present, and removed all things I provided, toilet paper, soap, etc., and kept it all in my room. Oh, it didn't take long for them to start packing after that. When they couldn't keep freeloading, they left within a few days because no electricity meant no video game binging and having to shower in the dark. To top it off, the girlfriend started harassing me with messages on Facebook, and my so-called mutual friends. They suddenly stopped talking to me, no longer invited me to hangouts, just iced me out completely. And the biggest ducking blow, they invited those two to move in with them right after all they did with me. I later find out that the mutual friend she moved in with was at his mom's house. The mom threw her out too because of her disrespectful behavior. She tried to help her out like I did, only to regret it apparently. Shortly after all this, those two broke up and the psycho girlfriend joined the army, only to be thrown out from there too. When even the US military doesn't want to deal with your crazy ass, there's clearly some serious crap going on with you. Then suddenly, mutual friends try to talk to me again like nothing happened. Needless to say, I've ignored them. Enablers have no place in my life. The next one is an entitled parent story. I've always had a fraught relationship with my parents. If I had to briefly summarize the last few decades of our relationship, I'd say that my dad is very stern, controlling, and emotionally volatile, and my mom is an absolute cacophony of anxiety. My father embodies the traditional husband role. He can be caring, but he has complete dominion over my mother and will tell her what she can do, when she will be home, what time she will go to bed. That woman better have dinner ready, and by God, she will not talk back. My mother has good qualities. She's generally kind and caring, but she tends to be an absolute doormat. She lets others treat her badly, her husband especially, and is frustratingly spineless at times. Her modus operandi is to take the path of least resistance, behavior that led to a rift between us as she sided with my dad's abhorrent actions, because appeasing him was more beneficial than siding with her son, such as when I found CP on my dad's computer. We'll add an addendum at the bottom since this seems to catch people's attention. So, my parents have retired to Portugal, but they came over to visit. I recently went no contact with them for about a year, but we've somewhat patched things up over the past year where our relationship is shallow but relatively amicable. My parents were staying with some of their friends, but my dad took offense to how much work he was doing and how little his friend's wife was doing, so he blew up and asked to crash at my place. My father was clearly making an effort to be more accommodating. He asked me 1,000,000 times if it was okay if he bought a mattress for the guest bedroom because he didn't want to make changes that I wasn't okay with. This effort was self-derailed pretty quickly. The conflict, I was offered help incessantly. My girlfriend and I were in the process of moving, and my dad offered to help us move furniture. I preferred to do it on my own, so I politely declined, but he kept offering, over and over and over. He'd insist to help, and he'd keep ducking, asking within minutes of me saying no thank you. Later, my dad handed me a package, and it was a new $1,000 phone that I never asked for, that I don't need, and that I genuinely don't want to have. He didn't mention anything until it arrived. He started ordering furniture for the guest bedroom without asking, which was a departure from, "Are you sure it's okay if I get a mattress to sleep on?" He kept asking if I wanted food, and I said no thanks, and he'd bring food home anyways. He took us out for dinner and a bit of his plate for me, and then he demanded that I eat it. My mom said he bought me a smoker and then returned it since he was getting the sense that I didn't want to accept his barrage of arbitrary gifts. I can see how I might come off as ungrateful, continuously ducking my dad's attempts to bond, but I swear to God there is something seriously wrong about the gift giving. He won't take no for an answer, he displays passive aggression when I don't give in, and he absolutely will not tolerate the boundaries I put up. This has also been things seemed fine on Tuesday. The demands to provide for help me had been minimal throughout the day, and my girlfriend had offered to make a nice dinner for us. My parents were enthusiastic about it and kept commenting about how good it smelled. My partner and I stepped out for a brief walk while the pasta sauce simmered, and when we got back, my parents were right at the door. I asked them if they were heading out, and my dad said yes. My mother, with tears in her eyes, sputtered out, "Everything is going to be okay." At this point, I got the sense that something happened and that they were leaving. I asked my mom if I'd see her again before she went back to Portugal, and she said, "You're young, you can do whatever you want," which left me dumbfounded. What the hell is going on? I've seen my dad get his feelings hurt over nothing and make a scene about it before, so while I was caught off guard, I wasn't shocked. My partner was incredibly offended, however. They tried to Irish goodbye us as she was cooking them dinner. We can only speculate what pissed my dad off, and I don't care to give him a chance to explain himself. I'd love to just go on and on about my family dynamic, especially since I've been exploring it a lot recently, but I'm opting to leave things here for brevity. Worth noting that, with my mother at least, my relationship was definitely inappropriately enmeshed growing up, which was a pretty big revelation for me. I would love to hear about others with parents and inappropriate/excessive/obsessive giving. I'm struggling to take in this behavior, and I'd appreciate the perspective of others. If anyone wants me to clarify anything, I'm chomping at the bit to explain what's up, so feel free to ask. Anyway, thank you for watching.